Nikon Z mirrorless cameras. Let's look at the budget options. If you want to go with the cheapest, you have the Nikon Z30. I actually picked up one of these used recently. I started using the Z30 in this video rig. It does have limitations based on current firmware. Sadly, at 4K using the full range color output, maybe 30 minutes or so. I haven't really timed it specifically, but it will overheat. You turn the camera off and then within a minute or two, it starts working again. But yeah, compared to the Canon EOS M6 Mark II cameras that I had used in this rig for hours at a time without issue, it's kind of disappointing to see a video focus camera. Of course, it's a lower cost video focus camera, but it is specifically designed for video, and at 4K having overheating issues indoors in controlled environment, just doing HDMI out with a DC coupler, so there's no additional heat from the battery, and even removing the memory card doesn't help. Just keep that in mind if you're going to consider this for video. I'd currently call it more of a 1080p camera than a 4K camera, unless you're doing 10, 20 minute, maybe 30 minute clips of 4K. I don't know about internally at this point, but even just doing the HDMI out, it's overheating. Nikon, please, if you see this video, give us the option to increase the thermal cutoff or something. If you want to do 4K streaming, this is not going to work out for you because you only get like a 30-minute stream at 4K. Obviously, 1080p probably will work fine, but I haven't tested it yet. That's the current state of my testing. And this camera does have some quirks. That's the point of this channel. I'm trying to learn things, and I do switch out equipment as often as I can realistically to try things out and do actual use so I can give the best, most informed opinions as possible on camera gear. Does not have a viewfinder at all. You're just going to have the screen, which does fully articulate, and it has a good amount of buttons functionality. This is a very video focused camera, but it does photos as well. On the top you have your custom settings, which will differentiate between photo or video. So definitely a very versatile, relatively compact camera, and it's their current cheapest camera, probably because it doesn't have a viewfinder. They can make it cheaper than the Z50, and this is actually newer than the Z50. One memory card, so you're not going to have instant backup in the camera, but I don't think any Nikon cameras, older ones, I don't think they do dual video recording. Besides that, you have the Z50, which is the oldest original mirrorless APS-C camera for the Z mount. It's getting pretty old at this point, although it uses the same sensor, so actual image quality is not going to be much different between any of the APS-C cameras here. It has a single card slot, it has a viewfinder, the screen does articulate a little bit. At this point, I would only go for a Z50 used. I wouldn't buy it new unless there's very little difference in price. I feel like they're going to replace this at some point, we'll see. And then if you want the kind of retro styled camera with the same sensor, you can go with the ZFC, but that definitely goes up in price. I think one of the better starting options is the Z5. It's full frame. It's pretty versatile from a photography standpoint. I actually have one of those as well. This is a Z5 in a camera cage. It can be relatively inexpensive depending on discounts, and you get a nice viewfinder, full frame sensor. If you care about video, this is definitely not the best option. It does 1080p fine, but the 4K has a significant crop, 1080p 30 frames a second. You can see how it looks. And I'm going to go to 4K mode, and you'll see the additional crop factor that happens. Right here is 4K on the Z5, definitely much tighter framing with that 4K crop factor. So not ideal, and probably the rolling shutter performance on this is not great either. I haven't really used it much to know for sure, but at the very least it's an option. I'd say either the Z5 or the Z30 are nice starter options. You can consider an original Z6 or Z7, but they do have expensive memory card formats and a single card slot. Although moving into the future, the Z6 II and Z7 II could come down in price quite a bit, we'll see. And you can consider those as well. So the landscape of Z cameras is a little limited at this moment. We'll see how things go though. Looking at prices on Adorama, see that the Z30 without a lens is $606.95. So that's basically your entry point. You're not going to get anything cheaper at the moment. Or if you want a lens on it, it ups the price around $100. So the Z50 jumps up in price $200 without a lens. That's a pretty significant increase in price. I don't think it's worth it for a new one. In this case, $806.95. Yeah, see how much with the lens is. Or you could spend another $50 compared to the Z50 to get the newer ZFC Firmware wise and such, you should get more functionality out of this. It has the more physical controls. The grip is going to be very personal preference based. Definitely try to handle the ZFC and see if it works with your hands and everything and it feels comfortable. Of course, you can buy an additional grip and such for it if you want. The Z50 with a lens, currently new on Adorama, is $950. I've said it 3 times already, but I'd go used if you want that camera. So I'm looking at new lenses that are autofocus in the Nikon Z mount. The first cheapest one on the list is a Meiki 85mm f1.8 full frame capable lens. Not the best option for an APS-C camera, but if you're getting the Z5 to start off, that could be a somewhat interesting option. I don't know about autofocus or optical quality of this lens. You'll just have to do your research and see if it works out, but $200 for an 85 1.8 on paper looks pretty decent. Then we get into the actual Nikon options. You can see these are refurbished, so I wouldn't necessarily consider these prices because it's going to depend on if it's available. So let's skip the refurbished ones, but you can see they are here. I would consider them at the very least if you do see them available. The cheapest new Nikon option here is the 40 f2. I think that's a pretty nice combination for either full frame or APS-C. So if you do get a Z30 or a Z50 used, you could consider this lens as a nice larger aperture option, $276.95 at the moment. Then we go to the 28 2.8. I do have this lens. It's decent. I wouldn't say the optical quality is amazing. It's kind of sufficient in my opinion, but it's kind of hard to quantify here. In general, you're going to get a somewhat larger aperture on this lens compared to the kit lens. So at 28mm f2.8, not super wide aperture, but it at least would help in some situations a little bit. $276.95 is a pretty reasonable price. And then we have a APS-C specific option, 24mm f1.7. So if you do want a larger aperture, you are pretty sure that you're just going to stay with a DX APS-C size sensor camera into the future. You could consider this, but basically the same price for a 24 instead of the 28, but you will get the larger aperture. I'd probably go with the full frame option because it just feels like with the Z5, how it is priced, it's so close. I don't know if I would get into APS-C too much. So really the only reason I picked up the kit lens with this, I needed something wide enough for the APS-C format to do certain types of videos. So that's why I got this with the kit lens. And then we get into the APS-C kit lens. There's a silver version, black version, $306.95. Definitely don't buy it new. Don't buy it like this. Get it with a kit because it's basically going to be $100 in a kit compared to over $300 just bare. That's not great. You can get a used one potentially, but you're still spending almost twice the price as a kit. Here we get into some third-party options. The Viltrox 33mm f1.4. This is an APS-C specific lens. You're going to stay in that format, not go to full frame. Consider stuff like this. I did have this for the Canon EFM mount. Viltrox had sent me the trio of lenses. They're pretty decent. I don't know regarding firmware and if there are any quirks with these Z-mount versions. You'll just have to do some research on that and make sure they work consistently. 316 is pretty reasonable for the large aperture, but it is APS-C specific. And 56, same situation, and the 23. So those are all APS-C specific lenses. The thing you should take note of is that if you try to put those lenses on the Z5 or any other full frame Z camera, it does not let you go into full frame mode as far as I can tell. A weird choice by Nikon to not even give you the option to go into full frame regardless of the lens that is attached. This is the lens that I probably would have liked to get if I wanted to spend more money with the Z30 for video work. It's a wider 12mm to 28, 3.5 to 5.6, so the apertures aren't great, but it is motor based zoom and focus, which is pretty cool. Works well. So in this case, I have the Sony a6000, which has a similar setup with its lens. Consider this over the standard kit lens, depending on what you need. Do you need more wide? Do you need a little bit more reach with the 16 to 50? But I probably would have bought this if they were the same price. I would have gone with this instead, but it's a little bit more expensive. There's another APS-C specific lens, 50 to 250. If you want a kit lens style telephoto, check it out. A lot of these, if you do go with the Z5, they just are bad options. Here's another Viltrox lens. This is full frame capable 35 1.8. I think this would be a nice option for either full frame or APS-C. So 35mm on the APS-C crop DX. sensor is going to be a pretty standard field of view. So I'd definitely consider this Viltrox, especially over the APS-C ones that they have. You're going to spend more, but it's not a huge amount. Same situation here. There's a full frame 24mm f1.8. Set your kit lens to whatever focal length and see which one feels better for the type of photography and videography you do. So if I could easily set this to 24mm and just get a general idea for what you're going to see and get out of it. Obviously the apertures are different. 35, 24, and the 28. A lot of options here with Viltrox. Then we get to Yongnuo 85 1.8 Z. This is going to be another situation where you want to do some research and see if it has good focus and optical quality. Hard to say. The 6 reviews with 5 stars, probably pretty decent. And then we get to the Z24-50 kit lens for full frame cameras. I did get this lens with the Z5. It's relatively compact. It is the type of lens where you pop it open to use it, so it extends quite a bit and it locks into place when you don't need it. It's okay. I would definitely not pay this full price for that lens. Ups the price quite a bit. I think I paid $300 with the kit, so around $1,300 with the camera and the lens at the time. So you could get a used one if you really wanted it. Another Viltrox, in this case f1.8, is going to be a full frame. Yep. So this could be an interesting option for APS-C cameras if you want to go that route, and then it'll be a nice standard field of view option for full frame if you do eventually get a Z5. Then we get into the Viltrox 85 1.8. I think this is one of their first lenses on this system, so I have to see if it's still pretty solid comparatively to their newer stuff. Getting up in price though, so we're definitely starting to spend quite a bit. And Sigma, they have their APS-C primes on Z mount now. These are not going to be full frame capable. Like I said, with the full frame Z cameras, they force you into APS-C mode, which works, but it's not flexible in my opinion. So the 30, I have not used this much. A friend showed me theirs in Micro Four Thirds mount, but didn't do much besides that with it. You could at least consider this. I would go with a full frame option, most likely. I get into a Viltrox 13mm f1.4. APS-C specific. This would be more of a specialty thing. If you know you need it, you need it. And then the 26mm f2.8, I'd probably go with the 28mm f2.8. It's much cheaper. Super small lenses don't make a ton of sense to me on Z mount because it's only going to be so small. And from what I've heard of this lens, it makes some noise when it's focusing. This inner barrel extends when it's focusing. It is optically better from what I've heard compared to the 28, which would be nice, but additional costs and everything just doesn't feel worth it. Here's the APS-C 56 Sigma. Could at least consider it. In my case, I'd probably go with a full frame option because I have the Z5 in addition to the Z30. You could potentially get the Sigma 16 on the Z30 and do a webcam setup, but they're at least an option. It's not cheap though. I did have and like this lens on the Canon EFM system, but here it's more expensive and there are other options available, so it doesn't feel as much of an instant buy type of situation where Canon was pretty limited in the EFM system of what options you had. Here's a classic 50mm f1.8s. I do have this lens. It's very nice optically. No complaints. It's decently large, but still pretty expensive. This would be decent for a portrait lens in APS-C or a standard walk-around lens for the most part on a full-frame camera. We've got our first Tamron specific option, 70-300. It's a pretty standard telephoto lens, kind of a kit-style telephoto lens. Full frame capable, $600. Aperture range is not great, but I mean, that's just what happens with this type of lens. They're pretty expensive from the start. APS-C, do it all, 18-140. If you're going on a trip or something and you're concerned about weather conditions and stuff, you don't want to be switching out lenses often, you could consider something like this, but in many situations, I'd rather have more specialty glass, and this thing is not cheap. I'd personally skip it. And then we get into first party 35 1.8. I would be curious to see how this stacks up to the Viltrox. This one's almost $700, so we're to the point where these lenses are as much as the camera itself. If you're trying to get in budget, you're just going to be hitting a wall at this point where you're going to need twice the amount of money to get a lens that is of a higher grade than whatever camera you get, around $700. Let's take a look at used options with KH specifically. There are other options, MPB, Use Photo Pro, even the rental places sell cameras and lenses occasionally. But with KH, looking at the camera bodies, you have the Z30 for $521 on the cheapest grade to $533, no lens. I paid $557 before tax on the Z30 that I got with the lens. So I saved a little bit more compared to KH, but the packing job from B&H was not ideal, although the camera seems fine. Obviously, you're going to have less of a warranty compared to a new one, most likely. With KH, it's 6 months. With B&H, it's 90 days. So I've personally got 90 days to make sure this Z30 works. If you do want a viewfinder, Z50, 621. Let's take a look and see what the grade is here. So that's the EX Plus 621 with a battery and charger, or you can get the like new for $10. Go with the ZFC if you don't mind the grip differences. Because it is newer, it's going to have more support. Although the price difference here is pretty significant. Over $100 price difference. So if you want this, you're going to have to know that you want it. And again, consider the ergonomics of it. It does have more buttons and dials and stuff, but it also has the very flat grip. And it's expensive. This is kind of a tough sell for me. It does have the fully articulating screen. If you don't need to do a lot of video, I'd probably spend the extra money to get a Z5 instead of this. So here we've got the Z5 used on KH. The cheapest one, $889. I spent $1,000 on mine, new. But photography, viewfinder's nice. The camera's nice. It has the joystick nub selector for focus, or you can use the touchscreen. The screen itself only articulates vertically. It doesn't flip forward to the user. So for video, it's not ideal. Autofocus isn't going to be the best thing ever, but it's been consistent for me. I'd say it's very comparable to the Canon EOS M6 Mark II that I had with face detect autofocus. I use those cameras side by side in a cosplay photography situation, and the number of photos that were good versus bad, either my mistake or the camera, they were very close. But obviously that's an APS-C camera compared to a full frame one, but yeah, very close. I like this camera. It's nice. I use it for standard photography stuff. I use it for manual lenses, which is kind of the dream camera for manual glass, old film era stuff. You adapt it to the camera. You can zoom multiple levels. This is very, very nice because you have that electronic viewfinder, and focusing is easy as it almost can be for any type of manual focus situation. Peeking, zoom in, multiple levels on dedicated buttons. Yeah, very nice. So I think that's the ideal starter if you don't care too much about video. Or you could consider Z6. It probably has a little bit better focus and such. The sensor in there is probably a faster readout. It does have 4K video, but then you have that one specific card format. It is XQD, but it also now supports the CF Express, I'm pretty sure. But you could do 4K 30 with this camera and no crop, which is nice if you do want video. And the price difference isn't huge, $937 for an EX Z6. The Z6 can be a potential option for you if you don't care about the single card slot thing. With the Z5, you have the 2 SD card slots, which is nice for instant backup in the camera. But you can't do instant video backup. Then we jump up quite a bit in price. Last thing we're going to look at is used lenses on KH in the Z-mount. Obviously, you can adapt F-mount lenses to Z-mount, and they should work pretty decently well. I personally like native lenses, but we are relatively limited in Z-mount still. But you have to consider the price of the adapter. If you do want to adapt, consider that the official adapters do not allow you to do focus with D-type lenses and earlier, because those don't have motors in the lenses. Apertures should work fine. Mirrorless lenses and Z-mount native. We have the 16-50 kit lens, APS-C specific. So don't consider that as is. You don't get a warranty with those. It probably doesn't even work. EX Plus for $137. That's somewhat close to a kit. So if you really wanted this lens and you didn't buy it as a kit, you could consider getting a used one. But here's another APS-C specific lens, the Viltrox 33 on here for under $200. If you are set on APS-C format, you could consider lenses like that. $219 for the 28mm f2.8, decent lens. Could definitely consider that on either format, depending on your preferences of field of view. Same thing with the 40 f2. Well, that jumps up in price a little bit, so if you want the 40, you're gonna have to spend a tiny bit more. So here's a full frame 24 f1.8 from Viltrox, $323. Not a terrible price considering. Or the 24-70 f4 is a nice ranged one, especially for full frame. You're going to spend probably around $400 to $500 for it though. So you're getting very close to the price of your actual starter camera. Unless you get a Z5, then ultimately you're going to be spending probably $2,000 to get started with all the accessories, maybe another battery type of thing, memory card, and the Z50 f1.8s. Nice lens, 461 for a used one. I'd definitely consider that with either full frame or APS-C. You could either consider a portrait lens on APS-C or pretty standard walk-around lens on full frame field of view. Yeah, that's pretty much it. There are more options here, but they're getting relatively expensive. Not terrible in Z mount, but I think they have a long way to go with options, especially lower cost options. Hopefully we see a refresh of the Z50. I'd say go with the Z5 if you can get it, or maybe a used Z6 if you don't care about the card slot situation. Besides that, used Z50 would be okay as well. Or if you want to go bougie and retro, you could go with a ZFC maybe. Anyways, that was a look at the Nikon Z mirrorless camera system and what you might be able to get starting off. Scott for every Bonds, thanks.